Cara's going to talk with us today about this week's case study. And if you do have any questions and you're watching us live, please add your questions in YouTube in the comments, and Cara will answer them at the end of the discussion. Thanks for joining us, Cara. Can you please tell us a little bit about your role at MindBlank and a little bit about MindBlank and what MindBlank provides?
Will do. Thank you, Karen. Hello, everybody. My name is Cara. I'm going to start first by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet. I understand we're all meeting from different lands at the moment. I am from the Wiradjuri in Melbourne, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people who are watching now or who will be watching this. As I said, my name is Cara Matthews. I work for MindBlank. MindBlank is a charity that aims to reduce the risk of suicide by doing interactive performances in workplaces, communities, and schools. So far, I think we've performed to over 300 different shows to about 30,000 young people. And in the last little while, last kind of few years, we've moved into working with workplaces as well. So we're a charity that aims to prevent suicide. And one of the things that I'd like to talk about just before we start is just about what kind of this topic will be about today, particularly what it's not. So what we don't provide is this is not a certified mental health first aid course. It doesn't qualify anyone to be a counsellor. But what it will do is just help them raise awareness about mental health issues. It'll help with some strategies about how to promote and facilitate help seeking, what some of the self-care applications could be, some strategies about how to facilitate or host conversations about those kind of signs of anxiety and stress that happen in the workplace. So yeah, that's what kind of this conversation I think will be about today. Thanks, Karen.
Excellent. And you've been with MindBlank for how many years?
So I've worked with them for about 3 years now.
Yeah.
And before that, I worked at another company that did work in facilitating work around disability awareness in workplaces.
Awesome. And the case study this week is actually really prevalent at the moment. We're looking at Donna, who is, she's an effective, organized, efficient worker who, she runs her home really well, and she's really proud of her work. But unfortunately, due to COVID, she's now been forced in this situation of working from home, as so many thousands of people have. And she's obviously experiencing quite a lot of anxiety, and this seems to be an ongoing. It's regressed over the time. Is this common?
Yeah, it's absolutely common. I'm sure it's something that I've certainly experienced being in Melbourne, and having to transition to working from home. And I think it's something that everyone does, is that we tend to give ourselves this time period, right? We go, oh, this is a big change, a lot's happening. We'll kind of ease off on myself for a few weeks and that'll be it, and we don't kind of think about the constant stress and the routines and underlying things that we have in place naturally in a workplace that we don't when we're at home, and the distractions and that just being in your house has, just noticing that the floor needs vacuuming, or all of that kind of stuff. These are constant underlying things that aren't going to go away once you kind of adjust to the transition. So I think it's a very common thing that a lot of people have been experiencing in the last few months.
Yeah, and like you say, that initial shock, people were just, what do we do? How do we deal with it? And the employers, as you said in the case study, the employers are quite lenient to start with, but then obviously the standards go back up and the expectations increase, and yet the situation at home hasn't changed, but the standards have then gone back up again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's I think it's something that all workplaces need to be aware of and need to understand that this is actually a long-term change rather than something that can, the capacity has lowered, even though we don't necessarily realize that. And that needs to be something that we're comfortable having conversations about and able to have conversations about, and understanding that this isn't something that is just going to stop, and that we're so used to being able to achieve something, and it's things that we could achieve before. And because we're safe in our homes and we don't have to do anything, so why is it so hard? We don't necessarily recognize how big of a change this is for us and how unnatural it is.
Yeah, and the pressures of homeschooling. I mean, that's incredible as well. You're taking on another job essentially.
Absolutely. I can't, I have struggled and I don't have kids, I can't imagine what it must be like to have that very real, distraction, and being around that all the time. It must be very difficult.
Yeah, and I guess finally, Donna, then it's a ongoing slow process in her journey. She finally gets to the point where she has a panic attack, and she's at home on her own in isolation, and she has a panic attack, and she has that feeling of, I should be able to cope with this. And it's that feeling of losing control, I would imagine, that is creates a lot of the anxiety as well.
Absolutely. Anxiety itself is one of the symptoms of it is shame, pretty much. And having this, because in a way we have this view that nothing's changed and everything's changed at the same time. And we feel that we should be able to handle things. And anxiety itself, when you have your first panic attack, you have no idea what's going on. Like, this is not it, am I having a heart attack? Like, what's happening, and so it's really, really important, that we are able to facilitate those conversations and make sure that we have someone we can reach out to and feel comfortable enough saying, this is what's going on. I don't really know what it is, but I need help. And it's a really difficult thing to do when you have anxiety, let alone when you don't realize that that's what it is you're experiencing.
Yeah, and I guess my final point really from the case study, which really stands out, and I think it's quite prevalent, is that there was a lot of fear and uncertainty around whether jobs would be able to be maintained. And I think I would imagine there's quite a lot of, when people are allowed to keep their jobs and work from home, it feels that they're being given something which is a huge benefit, because they're still being able to keep their jobs and do their work. So there must be an element of needing to almost prove themselves, and this is what Donna mentions in the case studies, that Donna spends more time trying to prove she's working than actually working in itself.
Yeah, definitely. There is also a when you're in an office and you're working with people, you're checking in constantly, even though you don't realize it. You get up, you grab a coffee, you walk past 3 people, as you do it. And particularly, I think for managing, that's a very difficult. How does one manage workers when you're not in this place? So I think it's twofold. It's, workers going, okay, I need to make sure that people know I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm proving that I'm getting the work done. And managers are also going, how do I manage this? How do I work with my employees to help them feel supported, to help them meet their deadlines? How do we make sure that everything that's getting done is getting done, and we're not dropping any balls, without kind of just being able to go and chat to someone? And I think there's a lot of strategies that can be discussed about how we can have those conversations without making it feel like you have to tick a box and clock in and clock out every day, and feel like you're being scrutinized the whole time.
Brilliant. And that takes us actually really nicely into the first task question. And our first task question was, workplace mental health is whose responsibility? Is it the employer's? Is it the employee, or is it both?
Yeah, so the answer is everyone. It's everyone's responsibility. You know, business owners and leaders definitely play a key role in formulating the workplace culture. And policies and procedures are part of that, you know, what you put in them, how you communicate them to people, but it's also how you as a manager embody that. You know, employees take cues off of management about how to act and what's appropriate and what's not. So that's really important, but it's also really important to know that employees have a really important role in that as well. Specifically around, everybody has a responsibility to act if they notice that something's going wrong. You know, in the same way that you would act if you found an exposed wire or something. You know, if you notice someone is acting off, if you notice someone's behavior has changed, maybe they're missing deadlines that they wouldn't normally, maybe they're a little bit snappier, they're missing phone calls, you know, all of these signs that you think something's a little bit off, that needs to be recognized as a hazard, or as a sign of a hazard, and you as an employee need to act.
Yeah. And I guess there must be an element of training around that as well, in terms of, you know, people being able to understand what their mental and personal stress is, to be able to recognize that as a hazard as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think, why we have conversations like this. It's why, you know, like maybe you didn't know that people missing deadlines they normally would have hit was a sign of hazard, you know. I think that's why we have conversations like this. It's why mental health training is a thing. And it's really important to, you know, the main kind of signs are things, just changes in behavior, I think, is the biggest one. If you notice something is different to what it has been before, it's worth just checking in. It doesn't have to be a big thing, you know. It's just a, hey, you know, I've noticed you've been a bit off lately, or I've noticed that you seem to be struggling with a few things, with your workload, with whatever, you know. I just wanted to check in and see how you were doing. And having those conversations often not only facilitates them to be able to talk to you, but also if they have an issue, the workplace then has a culture in which someone may feel more comfortable actually coming out just from their own steam.
And in that respect, if a colleague noticed another colleague was feeling stressed, would who's responsible? Would it be the responsibility for them to speak to their manager, or and mention that they felt that there were a few issues, or would they speak to the other person? Is it really their place? How would somebody identify a hazard if they noticed that a colleague was in that situation?
Yeah, so it's really important, first of all, to recognize, you know, that it's not anybody's responsibility to fix a situation for anyone.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's not your responsibility to sign them up for counseling, or, you know, sit down and have 4-hour-long conversations with them, kind of getting into what's going on with their lives. I do think that there is an element of there is just an element of what is your relationship, you know, that basic human. My instinct would be to check in with the person first. You know, I think that there is a bit of a, if your first thing is to go to a manager and say, oh, this person's doing this, that might be a bit intense. And that's why I think, you know, facilitating these conversations of just, hey, I've noticed that was a bit of an issue, you know, how are you doing? And maybe the next step, if you've noticed there's a lot of issues, just checking in with the manager and going, look, I've just noticed isn't feeling too well, you know, so and so isn't feeling too well, seems to be acting a bit odd. You know, can you check in on them?
Yeah.
or something. And that's then that falls on the manager to definitely, hopefully the manager would have noticed.
Yeah.
But if not, definitely pointing it out to them and going, I'm just a little bit concerned about their well-being.
Yeah.
Do you think you could go in and check on them or something? And I think that's a totally reasonable thing to do if you're concerned
Yeah.
about someone's well-being. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And what in terms of work health and safety policies, so obviously organizations and businesses, they must have these work health and safety policies and procedures in place.
Mm-hmm.
What psychological hazards should be included in these policies and almost risk assessments as such?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So first, the workplace should focus on providing kind of preventative, stress-free workplaces.
Mm,
And that's part of just you kind of run-of-the-mill prioritizing, understanding workloads and how to distribute them, creating that culture where you can raise issues and challenges that you're having if you are. And then it's also about equipping the team members with the knowledge of what to do if there is a time in need. So some of the psychological hazards is a bit of a funny word, I think. And so they tend to come from things like increased mental and emotional demands, like conflicts arising from miscommunication, or if you're dealing with change, which is a big one
mm,
at the moment, bullying, work-related fatigue, stress, even things going on at home that are stressing you out, they have an impact on people, and they are a psychological hazard within the workplace as well.
yeah. And would how would you put that into your policy? How would you? I would imagine the policies have all completely changed in terms of identifying different hazards now that you're working from home. But
Mm-hmm.
how can you include elements of all those hazards within a policy? What type of approach would you take?
What kind of approach would I take? So I think it would be partially adapting what you have. So if
Mm,
you already have a great workplace policy where you had contact officers, or designated people that you would go to,
yeah,
it's important. You can adapt those. It's about making sure that everybody knows how, who, how, when, where they can get in contact with people that they need to talk to. It's about creating very um, clear procedures about, this is we check in, we check in weekly or monthly or whatever, for as in like a check-in, a well-being check-in, or just a what's going on, how's your workload, um, and having clear processes in place for what happens if somebody says, my workload's too much, I can't do this, this isn't working, that's not working. Having clear processes, which will vary from organization to organization depending
yeah,
on what you have the capacity to do, and it'll vary depending on the situation, but just having a very clear, if I'm having an issue, I know that this is where I go, this is what I do,
yeah,
this is the step. Because if you're already emotionally overwhelmed, going through a policy that's got all sorts of jargon that you don't understand is very difficult and overwhelming. So what you want to do is you want to have very clear steps about what you do if you notice somebody else is concern is having an issue, or if you're yourself having an issue, if you're a manager and your employee is having an issue. Very
yeah.
clear steps.
And that's important as well, because then that takes away, if there is that clear procedure and it's supportive and welcoming and embodied, then that
Mm-hmm.
takes away some of that element of shame as well that people feel, because if it's already
Absolutely.
recognized that this may happen, and it's expected that this may happen, and if it does, and we've got a
Mm-hmm.
procedure to help you, they feel that it's just a natural, it's an okay thing to do.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's part of. Yeah, it's really important that your policies kind of outline that it is okay that this is happening. That this is we're people, we're not robots. We have difficult times in our lives, and it's really important that that is recognized and accepted.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And that again leads us nicely into the final question on the case study sheet, which was, what would a supportive remote workplace culture look like in Donna's scenario?
In Donna's scenario, yeah. So I mean, I'm sure you have some ideas. I have some ideas. First of all, her manager and or a colleague could just kind of empathetically sit down and listen. Like I was saying before, these conversations, hey, I've noticed things aren't going well.
Yeah.
What's going on? I'm here. Like, do you want to have a chat? Pardon me. They can voice that they're concerned about her well-being, or that they're worried about her. And then, it's about the resources or contact numbers. If you have an EAP or if you have a contact person within your organization, some mental health resources, having that conversation and then saying, here are the places, the things that you can do to help. And even just, as an organization, facilitating conversations around self-care. And, it's really important to like, for example, we cleared out a little storage room so that I have an office so that I can close the door at the end of the day and that's it. It's the little, not everyone has that option, but it's the strategies that delineate work from life, specifically when you're working from home, and just all the little self-care conversations that you can have, and knowing that helping prioritize workloads, I think, could also be a really helpful thing. I know when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I've just got I'm like, everything is priority one. I've got no I go and I write a list and I try to put them in priorities, and I have to cap the amount of red priorities that I'm allowed to have, because otherwise they'll all be red. So yeah, absolutely. So conversations around that.
Yeah, and I guess the manager being able to say, this is what I really need from you this week. If you can focus on getting those few things done, and then we can tackle the other things, next week, and we'll work out a priority. But if you can just get these couple of things done.
I went through and we pop up as a big head on the screen in their classroom, and they play the scenes, and then we will talk through, or we'll get them up to act things out, or they'll role play with me, or and just getting them not only to talk about new strategies and we can implement, we can give them some ideas, but also to empower them to understand that they actually know the tools. They know what to do. They know what they want in a friend. They know how they want those conversations to go, and they give each other the ideas, which I think empowers them to be able to have those conversations in real life.
Absolutely. They're not being told what to do. They're coming up with the solutions themselves, which is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a really important part of it, I think.
That's brilliant. And how can schools reach out to you and Mind Blank and find out more, and possibly inquire about your programs?
Yeah. So info@mindblank.org.au is the info email. So you can email them and ask for more information. You can also go to the website, which is www.mindblank.org.au. And so you can, there's a whole lot of information about the services that we provide, the different programs that we have, who the people are that are involved. And because every story is created from a real lived experience that has happened in an Australian school. So you'll be able to get more about the places that we've done, places that we've been, and the kinds of programs that we can run.
That's awesome. And I like the way that you've done the videos as well. I can imagine that with so many students that have been learning remotely and you know, their own mental well-being, it's probably a perfect time for them to sort of check in and engage with mental health.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's important, especially because this is a new era for everyone. Everyone's kind of relearning how to do this in a way that's not kind of in person just as we're passing. We have to be a little bit more purposeful about it now. So it's an important time to be having these conversations.
Absolutely. And we've come to the end of our discussion now, and I'd just like to thank you so much for your time, for sharing your expertise, and you know, for giving us this fantastic case study, which is so relevant to what's happening in the world today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation.